It's a franchise operation. There's no proper feedback loops. There's no discussion of the minutiae of the things that didn't work. And for me, what we're seeing is a whole load of people who've never done Agile, have never done it at scale, telling people how to do it. Right, and what they do is, because they've got the ear of the executives, because they've been talking to them for years, promising them things that didn't work then either. They know who the executives, they've got them under control, and they're not listening to the people with experience. And I think we kind of need Agile to get back to its roots, which is people doing this stuff, talking to people doing this stuff. And even the Agile Alliance, I mean, I went to Agile 2017, and given that the first conference I went to, I was sharing a table, I was on a table of 6 people with Jerry Weinberg, with Tom Poppendick, you know, and all these kind of amazing minds all around me. We were having conversations with each other. But when I went in Agile 2017, each room there was a guy at the front of the room or a woman at the front of the room, and they were talking to 200-300 people, and there was no communication going the other way. At the very first conference I went to, the entire conference stopped so that we could have open space and everyone could go and talk to whoever they wanted about subjects they were passionate about. In 2017, it was clear they didn't want people talking to each other because open space had gone from the entire conference to a single table in a corridor. So for me, it's always the complaint I've got is that the Agile Industrial Complex is telling us it's perfect and that if you implement it, you're good. And what they're doing is they're drowning out that conversation between people really trying to improve things with each other. So I say, hey, let's start talking to each other again and stop listening to the people that have never done Agile. Yeah. And I'm going to stop there and hopefully someone else will start talking, because otherwise I'll look really silly.
And I'm not going to say anything because Luca went first and we all spoke already. So Luca, I think you might be next if you have something to say.
You're on mute.
You mute. I think you're muted, Luca. You're on mute.
While we wait for some question, I think I will start a second round talking about what we suggest as solution, or at least give some
solutions,
pointers to provoke thinking. And I think that I already agree with one of, well, done as a powerful one, a domino move that will triple down all the other dominoes. But also, Chris mentioned a solution that came into my mind, and is talking to each other, sharing information, sharing the learning as well as the failure, especially with senior leader and CEO. And then for us practitioners, please burst your framework bubble and go back to talk with each other in the Agile community. Throw away proprietary solution and one-man show and go back to the community. And then there are ways to spot genuine practitioners, I think, and genuine consultancy company. I think if you look hard enough, you can find and see who is who.
Very nice. I offer two action steps. The first action step is start becoming aware of who and what you're authorizing. So as a simple thought experiment, I'd like everyone to have a moment of silence and consider who they consider thought leaders. Like, name your favorite thought leader. Like, just take a few seconds and just do that now. I mean, everyone knows who the perceived thought leaders are. These people have authority in the community, right? They have standing. When they talk, people listen. You know who they are. Pick your favorite one and just get them at the forefront of your mind. Make sure it's a well-known name. Next, ask yourself, do I have any idea where they stand on the issue of imposing frameworks and practices on people without their consent? And this includes imposing frameworks on managers, right? So managers are also part of the people who are imposed upon here. So ask yourself, does my favorite thought leader have a position on imposition, on force, on coercion? And where may I see their public statement of position? Do that and see where it gets you. I can almost guarantee you that you will not be able to find a statement of clarity around this topic from your favorite thought leader. Next, I'd like you to think about your favorite Agile institution. Institutions are associations, groups, so on, that might be membership groups, might be other kinds of groups. They might have training, they might offer conferences. And ask yourself, where can I find the statement of position on imposition from my favorite industry institution? And the answer might surprise you because it's a big, huge nowhere. It's a big, huge zero, right? So when I said before that executives aren't educated, what I really mean to say is the people who have a standing and have a voice because you authorize them have nothing to say. So be careful who and what you authorize. When you go to your next conference, if you go into a session where your favorite thought leader is speaking, you are authorizing that voice. Is that really the best idea right now if they have no position on imposition? Individuals and interactions is the first value of the Agile Manifesto. How interesting that the institutions and the so-called thought leaders have nothing to say on this issue that is really causing harm to people in the industry itself, leaving it in a sort of limbo Groundhog Day state where we experienced the same thing over and over since 2010. Think about that and be careful who and what you're authorizing. And the second thing that I would say is get in there and educate executives, because the institutions and the thought leaders are not doing it. The reason why your executives move so slowly is because nobody's taught them anything about empiricism and how to be comfortable with it. They're happier with an ABC framework, and that's what's being sold to them. That's not, I don't think that's really indicative of progress. So there it is. Chris, do you have anything to add to what I said, or do you want to start with something new?
No, I'm going to start. I think there's one of those scaled frameworks that I particularly like, so I'm going to advocate for it because I've actually tried this one and it worked. So I'm sorry, Dan, but there's this thing called open source scaling or something. Open source agile, I can't remember, or agile for open space, I don't know. There's this framework, and it's great because what you do, and I found this with a company where, you know, and it's not just developers, it's not just the people at the bottom. I went to a company where the management in the middle of the company, the kind of the people that would normally be driving change, they were really unhappy with the agile kind of rollout that was going on. And we did one of these, what do they call it? Open space for agility, I think it is. Yeah, you should check it out, Dan. There's this thing called open space for agility. And what we did is we got the execs to invite all the middle managers to a session. And we had 2 days where we didn't talk about, you're going to do this. We started out by just saying, getting the exec to say, here's the goal, here's the mission, here's where we're going for, this is what we need to do. That was like 5 minutes. And then we spent the next 2 days exploring the problems that they had to solve to achieve that goal. And it put those people in the middle management space who make things happen, it put them back in control of that transformation. And the effect from my perspective was I was trying to run a 1-day training course for middle managers, which was, here's a set of tools that I'm just going to just make you aware of them. You're not going to get a certificate, but you'll be aware of these tools and how they might help you. And it was things like theory of constraints and Cynefin and lean and lead time and stuff. And no one had signed up. And then we did the 2-day session to engage the management using the OSA, I think it is. And all of a sudden, they all turned up at the last minute, the day before. They all signed up and said, no, we want to find out about these tools. So this idea of inviting people to participate giving them a voice in this thing rather than just hiring a very expensive consultancy with no experience in Agile and getting them to come in and force this upon people. It's really great because you see them energized and get passionate about it. So there you go, Dan. I dare you to go out there and try this scaled framework that I think it's called open space agility. I dare you to try it.
Look, allow me to just jump in and clarify a couple of things. First of all, Chris is kind of poking fun at me a little bit about this open space stuff. And open space agility is the idea that you do an open space and then you announce one that's going to happen in 3 months, and you do experiments in the middle. It's an enterprise-wide iteration that's punctuated by whole group meetings that use the open space meeting format. Okay, so some guy in the USA invented this, but it's not actually a framework. So I want to just clarify. It works with whatever you're doing. It's actually a model for engagement. It's an engagement model. Not a framework per se. The theory is that people are not enthused when they're told or forced to do things, especially the high-performing people who typically have higher needs, have higher levels of a need for control and autonomy. Okay, so you're actually imposing a solution on solution providers with your engineers. And your engineers are smart, and they're architects and they're designers, and they're offended by you when you bring a prefabricated framework to them as a solution. You're bringing a prefabricated solution to a solution provider and a designer, and that's about the dumbest thing I've ever heard an executive could do. The best people will leave. They'll go where they're, respected. And inviting is probably the most respectful interaction you would ever engage in with another person, right? So inviting means they can opt out and they can say no, and that you're not attached to that outcome. You're hoping, but you're not going to try to coerce, manipulate, control. You might persuade them or try to persuade them, and persuasion is a gray area between inviting and mandating, right? And in general, if you look up the literature, if you look up on Google, but you are free to choose, and then put the word persuasion. So you go, you are free to choose persuasion into Google, and you'll find that it's the #1 way to get a person to say yes to your proposal. And isn't that interesting, right? So think about this, and then, what Chris said about open space, he's being facetious. I did a little work around open space around 2011, 2012, and formatted this before and after open space thing. But I actually borrowed it from Harrison Owen, right? So there's nothing original there. What is original is the application of it to organizational development, right? So that's what that's all about. But we don't have any inviting going on in the Agile community today, and we have a bunch of people saying all the right things and then doing the opposite. So I don't want to talk any longer. Why don't we take a few questions?
I'd like to clarify something, because I know Dan's downplaying his position here, and I'm tweaking his nose calling it a framework, but that's because I get paid more when I call it a framework. I think what had happened within the Agile community is that open space had become a very popular format for conferences. But what you did, Dan, is you showed how we could use the combination of open space and invitation to actually bring that technology into companies. So I think before the work that you did, it was difficult for people to even imagine running open spaces inside an organization, even though we were attending lots of them at conferences.
Right. And how?
Oh, sorry, you're going to have to take the credit for doing some good work.
No, if you say so, I'll take it. Thank you, Chris.
So we do have a question from Harold. Harold, actually, do you want to just come on video and ask your question, or I can read it if you're not in place? You can do that.
Let me see. Can you see me?
Yes.
All right. So I like what you say about it being perfect, Daniel, or let's assume it's just natural. I'm thinking of the work of the fourth time. If it looks to me, based on all this, that the Agile Industrial Complex is headed for a really kind of nasty collapse. And I'm wondering if that makes sense to you and what might be the implications for our industry and the umbrella military-industrial complex. Just a small
Yeah,
question.
so the whole thing is kind of fractal, right? So the whole world is unstable right now. It's sort of spinning out of control, and people aren't talking to each other in a civil tone. This is also happening inside the organizations where we do our own work, and it could be happening in our own families as well, in our extended families. So the answer to all of this is to open up about this much space for conversation, which is what Chris's theme was all about. We were having dialogue, we were having conversations. Those were the days, right? So we need to get back to civil discourse and mutual respect, and it starts with invitation. So, you know, as far as like where the agile industry's going, I've had a change in my position on this. I believe that everything is perfect. And whatever happens is the only thing that could happen. And when it's over, it's over. And be prepared to be surprised. So in this sense, I look at everything that's come up to this point as just being perfectly okay, because you know what? It's what everybody wanted. It's exactly what we all wanted. We all got exactly what we wanted because none of us felt compelled to speak up or do anything whatsoever to push back on this. So let's just see. And I would reiterate that the two things: teach executives what empiricism is, and name your favorite thought leader in your favorite institution, and ask yourself, where do they stand? And if I asked them where they stand, what would they tell me? What would I hear? What would I be hearing? So I don't claim to know what the future holds, but I know what I'm doing with my clients, and it's not about imposing, coercing, manipulating, or what's the last word? There's one more word in there somewhere. But I'm not doing those things, and I won't work for executives that do.
Is it okay to deceive them?
I can't really hear you. You're kind of muffled.
Is it okay to deceive them, or
No, it's not okay to deceive anybody, actually, unless you're playing poker, and then you've got to be really good at deception. But if you're not playing poker, you should just straight up be saying what you want, what you think, and what you feel, and teach others how to do that as well. What we have right now in the Agile industry is a bunch of leaders that each of us is authorizing who have nothing to say about the biggest problem facing the industry today, which is forcing people to do things they're unwilling to do and not asking them for feedback before you coerce them or impose your will on them. The so-called thought leaders and the so-called institutions have nothing to say. It's a crime. And you might ask yourself, why? Why don't they talk? Well, that's a less important question than what are you doing about it? So, you know, I'm happy to be here to discuss this and have a forum where that discussion can take place. So I'm thankful to the hosts and the organizers and my panel partners and you, Harold. So thank you.
Thanks, Harold. Richard, you had a question.
Sorry, but can I come to Harold's questions about, you know, the collapse of Agile or whatever? I think we have to look at this as, you know, it's what happens is people start with a good idea, you know. The original kind of, in a way, was, you know, the waterfall. If you read the original paper by Winston Royce, he really describes the first Agile kind of approach to developing software. And then what happens is people adopt it, and then it's successful, and then people copy it, but without doing the homework, without doing the research, without having the conversations, without trying it. They just declare themselves experts, and then they start propagating it. And what happens is it becomes, you know, devalued. And then after a period of time, another movement comes along that tries to address this. you know, so we had lean, we've kind of had quality management, we've had all of these things, and I think Agile was one of those things. And I think a lot of companies and organizations have adopted Agile, and they don't talk about Agile anymore because they're just doing it. There is no Agile kind of transformation, there is no Agile coaches, because they're just doing this TDD, they're doing BDD, they're doing scrums. It's just the way they work. They stand up when they have meetings so that people don't windbag and go on too long. They just adopt the practices with. And then what happens is we get to a point where a lot of people are coming in now and they're so disillusioned by the results they're seeing from this Agile thing that I think it'll just die away and something else will come back. And you know what it'll come back with? It'll come back with the principles and the practices of Agile, and we'll just go through this cycle again. So I think it's, and a lot of the people who are perhaps disillusioned from this version of Agile will be the ones who drive forward the next. So Luca and I were part of a private chat discussion with Dan and a number of others. And what was quite interesting is from the year, from the tens to the from the noughties, from 2000 to 2010. There were a lot of things about Agile that were just assumed, and there was it was like, you know, that joke about the goldfish in the goldfish bowl, and it's water's nice today, and the other goldfish says, well, what's water? There were some things in those early days Agile projects that were just, they were there, and I think invitation was one of those key issues. And I think what we're doing at the moment is we're rediscovering some of those unwritten rules of Agile that made it successful, because everyone focused on the obvious artifacts of the culture, you know, the Edgar Schein stuff about the stuff that's visible, and they didn't see the stuff that was hidden below the surface. And as we're coming through the tens, what's happening is we're seeing these failures, even though people are applying these really great practices. You know, we're seeing people take Scrum, which is really a kind of meant to be a liberating approach, and we're discovering that it's being used as a way to micromanage and make people's lives misery. And we're actually discovering what some of those unspoken practices and principles are of Agile. And I think at some point there'll be a new version of something that focuses on them as well. And that'll be successful for 5-10 years while it's unpopular, and people see it as a community where they can learn. And then when it becomes successful, the same thing will happen. And Steve Freeman, a good friend of mine, recommends a book by Hoffer. I haven't read it, but he has. And that's why he's smarter than me, where he says that this constant cycle of, you know, you have these learning communities that then become successful, and then it becomes a racket. And I think we'll perhaps just see something new where we'll have people who don't declare themselves certified, fix the really bad stuff in organization coaches. They'll just go and fix the bad stuff in organizations because they they've seen it work in good places, and they've seen it in bad places, and they'll be able to work out how to take some of those bad places to good places. And we know there are some bad places that will just get worse anyway, no matter what you do.
Well, Richard, you had a question about freeing management from cults, I think. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I mean, so I earlier posted, you know, you're doing the hard sell here on these ideas, but you don't have to sell us. I think probably everyone here agrees with everything you guys are saying. But from our perspective as Agile practitioners, most of us, I'm sure, down on the bottom end of the organizational ladder, and we're seeing what looks like our management just joining this cult of safe and getting carried away with it. Do you have any practical suggestions how we can kind of start breaking them free of that hold that it's got on them?
So can I jump in here? Because I think that I've seen this, and what happens is the safe is bought in, and it's the goal is to be doing Agile, the goal is to be doing safe. And the real conversation you want to have is, why are we doing Agile? Why are we doing safe? And deeply understand what good looks like, so that you go, right, okay, we're thinking we're doing safe, but why are we doing it? And fundamentally, with all of Agile, we're going to reduce the lead time. Yeah, we're going to deliver value to the customers, but we're doing that already because otherwise the company go bankrupt. The quality is good enough, otherwise the customers leave and we go bankrupt, but it's taking us a long while to do it. So we're going to do things quicker. Let's measure that. Let's set that as the goal to reduce lead time rather than implement SAFe. Because what we often find is that companies will successfully implement SAFe, which means they will jettison the bits that are difficult to do and they'll focus on the bits that they find easy to do, which doesn't require them to change. And they go, yes, we've successfully implemented SAFe. Instead, ask the why. Why are we doing it? And see if you can shift it. I've got a really interesting story here, which is I was the Agile transformation lead for a third of a very large bank. So I was responsible for about 3,000 developers, technologists, and about 1,000 business change people. And we had a problem that the business were coming to us and saying, we've got to implement SAFe. And we said, why is that? And they said, well, we've spoken to all the consultancies and they're all saying they're the best, but they're all recommending SAFe. And so we've decided we're going to do SAFe, but we just got to choose which consultancy we're going to partner with. And so my boss, the MD, and I invited all of the consultancies in, and we said to them, no, we're not going to do SAFe. And we explained what they are going to do. And they were delighted because they were like, yeah, we'd love to help you achieve what you want to do. And so they're not really in the market of selling SAFe. They're in the market of selling themselves. And if you can give them an alternative, they'll buy into that just as quick as they'll buy into SAFe. So you're not going to find resistance from the consultancies. They just want to sell their people and they want to help you however they can. And actually, they're just trying to use SAFe because they think that's what people want. Sorry about that. You're muted, Dan.
Yeah, why do people want SAFe? This is actually the culprit, right? It's the demand for a coherent story. That's the culprit. Okay, we teach empiricism, do a little, learn a little, gather feedback, react to the feedback, go again. That is not an ABC coherent story. But SAFe and other frameworks provide, even Scrum, even Kanban, provide a coherent story about what you should do. Okay, so most people are stressed out by ambiguity, by liminality, by not knowing where they are when they're in between two places, right? So this is the reason. The big picture of SAFe embodies this idea. It tells a big, coherent visual story that everyone can go, oh, I'm right there, I'm right there, and I'm right there. So this is one of the great evils of the world, is that we as human beings are absolute suckers for a coherent story, irrespective of whether it's the truth or not. Okay? So this is the basic problem, is this total discomfort with not knowing. That is the fundamental problem. And I'm getting some thumbs up from some people, so I like this idea. Yeah, if we're gonna change things, then we're going to have to challenge and confront. So for homework, I'd like everyone to consider asking their favorite thought leader where they stand on imposition. I think imagine if 1,000 people did that, where we would be. Well, here's what would happen right away. Everyone who would take the Fifth Amendment is my right not to incriminate myself in America. Taking the Fifth, it's called. This is what they're all doing right now. But if they're confronted and forced to answer, they will be deauthorized. Because think about it. If they go on the side of imposition, they look foolish in light of Agile Manifesto principles, Agile principles. And if they go on the side of invitation, they're going to alienate their trading partners who will be screaming with their hair on fire for what they just said. So the best thing is for them to say absolutely nothing. We need to confront them and ask them to say something. We need to invite them to tell us where they stand. And if they say I have nothing to say, then that there has to be consequences to that. People and institutions need to be deauthorized. There's a whole lot of people who have no idea what's going on in the Agile industry because they've only been involved for 18 months. You know,
And
many of us have been here for 16, 17 years. So why don't we all just, for homework, ask a thought leader or an institution to please tell us where we can find their statement of position on the web about this issue of forcing people, which is totally opposite to the principle of respect for people, which is a core lean idea, right? So everyone is like, how can I say this? The say-do gap is about a mile wide. Let's close the gap, okay? That's my advice. That's my ask. That's my invitation. Go ask someone who's notable and has a prominent voice where they stand, and then be prepared to be surprised.
Yeah. I'm going to jump in with another answer as well, Richard, if that's okay. So I'm really lucky. I've worked with some really, really smart people. Most of them you would never have heard of because, you know, they're all the really smart people. I steal their ideas and I tell everyone else and I get the credit. That's kind of Agile Thought Leader 101. But Tony Grout was my transformation leader at Skype and at Lloyd's, and he was brilliant. And he every now and then he'd just drop these ideas, and you go, "Oh my God!" And he said to me once, he said, "The thing about Agile is it doesn't tell you how to be successful." He said, "All of the Agile practices, if you think about it, TDD, BDD, Scrum, Kanban, what they do instead is they're the simplest process that will tell you the problem you need to solve. And then according to your context, you solve that problem the best you can." And the problem I have with SAFe is it's trying to be a solution. Whereas if you look at all the successful Agile tools, what they are is something that shows you how to find the problems, and then associated with that there may be a community or a book or something that shows you some of the common ways you can solve that problem. But fundamentally, Agile is about helping us understand where we need to focus our attention to improve. It doesn't tell us how to improve. Yeah, and the problem with SAFe is it's kind of in an evolutionary dead end, that it doesn't show you what the problems are and how to solve them. In fact, what it's doing is it's desperately trying to cover up the problems that it's encountering. But if you're paying attention, you can see they're really struggling at the portfolio level. They don't know how to do it. And the reason is because they're trying to offer a solution. They're trying to tell you how to do it rather than step back and give you a very simple framework. And I've got a framework for this, a very simple, and I pay for, and you can pay me for it if you want. If you can't read and you can't read it on my blog, I'll read it out to you for a fee. But it shows you the problems to solve. And that's the thing about Agile. All the goodness, TDD shows you the problem to solve. It doesn't tell you how to fix the code. And that's the thing, and SAFe doesn't do that. It tries to solve all the problems, and as a result, it fails. But I understand, someone told me recently that it's now 14 months. So it's not even Agile in failing fast. It fails slowly rather than fast, because the goal is to, Dan, are you gonna, you're on mute.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and I join you in those ideas. None of that is going to get across unless we can communicate in the language of executive leadership. This is another big gap, and I think the character Richard, who's in the audience, brought this up. Like, what you know, a lot. I work at a low level. He said, right? I'm down low with the teams. I'm not involved in I'm not participating in the decisions. You've got to develop some executive coaching chops and some skills, and you've got to know the language of executive leadership, so you're dealt with as a trusted advisor instead of the hired help. So, for example, can I give you a little tip on this about how to do something today that will improve your executive coaching chops? Okay, here it is. When the executive looks away when you're talking, you must stop talking. And if you want to know why, I'll put it in the chat. It's called visual dominance ratio. Okay, it has to do with how long you look at them when they're talking compared to how long they look at you when you're talking. Okay, so someone who's socially dominant gets more of your attention when they're talking, and they actually give you less of their attention on a relative basis when you're talking. So if you want to be treated as an equal and you want to be treated as a trusted advisor, you must stop talking when the executive looks away while you're talking, because that is demoting you, and you are being demoted to hired help status in that spot, and you need to stop talking. Okay. Can I tell you a story about this with an actual executive? Is it okay if I do this?
Oh, please, please.
All right. All right. So I didn't even know about this until years later. I was doing it instinctively, and I found out later there was a name for it, visual dominance ratio. I worked with an executive that was very smart, and a lot of executives you have to say things several times for them to actually learn an advanced concept, right? So I would teach this fellow, and he would get it, and then I would repeat myself, and he would look away, and then you know what I would do? I stopped talking. So I noticed that every time I repeated a lesson, he would look away. And I said, Jake, I notice that when I repeat myself, that you look away. He's like, yeah, that's because you stopped talking. So he was responding to the fact that I stopped talking, and we had a beautiful conversation about this. It took me a while to adjust to his very rapid learning style, but he was adjusting to me immediately because I would stop talking when he looked away. And that was one of my more fun coaching engagements. So look it up, visual dominance ratio. I'll put it in the Wikipedia chat. I would normally be tempted to do a shameless plug. I'm not going to do that. But if you look me up, you'll find that there is a source of more learning on this that I provide if you want to take a peek. So I'm not going to be shameless about that. But I did give you that nugget. It comes, and I hope you enjoy it. I'll put this thing in the chat now and mute myself.
Luca, do you have any comments for Richard? And Astrid, if you want to come on up, I think you've got the next question.
I think very quickly for Richard, I shared with him one of the link. Let me throw it again. It's a document that the community is creating to inform decision maker about SAFE with a lot of information. So if we don't have the power of an organization in creating marketing material to inform executive and decision maker, but collectively we created this document with a lot of case studies, with a lot of opinion from experts, and with a lot of stories from real practitioners, all backed by a link with related sources. So
yeah, that's great. Actually, I found that. I think Alan Holub had recommended that over on Twitter.
wow.
So I found that a couple days ago. Thank you. Yeah.
Astrid, did you want to ask your question?
Yes, I really like to. I started working in a company at 1st of July, and they have someone called an Agile coach, but they are not. Just someone who's providing mechanisms for dancing and chantings around the daily stand-up. And I feel I have an agile, I know mindset is the wrong word, attitude maybe, so that I try to behave as if the company was agile, and a lot of my colleagues are burned by bad counseling, I think, what they told me. And I wonder what means do I have if I want to encourage my colleagues to try again. And if you have any advice going for that.
So the first thing I would recommend is really to go back and ask why. Not that too often when I work with teams, or organizations, it's assumed that we're going to do Agile. And I spend a lot of time really helping them think through why would we actually want to do Agile. And I actually work with one client where in the end we couldn't actually find a reason for the company to do Agile because of the nature of the market that they worked in. There was no advantage to doing things faster. So it's why do you want to do Agile? Yeah, and whatever that reason is, explore it and learn. I think it comes to the thing I was saying about what are the true values of Agile earlier, about and rediscovering those values. Some parts of the community in coaching have gone very much into the playful side, and that's great if you're in an environment that allows playfulness. But I tend to work in a lot of financial institutions, and it's kind of frowned upon, that side of things. So it's finding the playfulness in the work rather than being childish sometimes. And some environments it's mature to be childish, and in other environments it's not. But I would start the conversation about, okay, why do we want to do Agile? Why as a team do we want to do Agile? And then from there, kind of find your way back into it. But it's kind of like there's the practices of Agile, and then there's the value of Agile and the principles. And it's really, perhaps as you think about those principles and the why, rather than the should we do Kanban, should we do Scrum, should we have an Agile coach and all that stuff. Agile coaches should be really about helping you stabilize and go faster, because I tell you what, there's nothing more fun than shipping stuff into production and then all the business love you. That's really rewarding work. I've worked in several environments. I worked in one place where most of these places that are very agile, they have amazing gaming facilities. But what you find is that none of the developers are using the wonderful gaming facilities and ping pong tables and things like that, because their work is so much fun that they'd rather be working than playing on a video game. If you go to Spotify and visit there, they've got a whole room with 20 gaming PCs where you can go and game if you want to. When I went to visit, there was only one person in there because most people were enjoying their job more than going to the gaming room.
Yeah, that's also what I want to show these to my new colleagues, that working even in a financial surrounding business, really the work itself can be so much fun. We have such a great profession to be creative and to see. I'd like to have it named computer art, because it's more artful, it's creative, you can put so much things, you have to work together, it's a team sport, so many things that get lost if you are bound into some waterfall covered by some chanting and dancing of some so-called agile framework implemented by people who don't know what they do, and all the workers think, okay, if that's agile, I rather don't do it.
And if you think about what I said, Agile is about the processes that show you the problems.
Yeah.
And then according to your context, you pick a solution. And in some contexts, a bit of dancing and fun is what they need. In other contexts, it's something else. But
yeah,
it's just understand the problem and pick
dancing
the
and
solution.
chanting is just like daily stand-up. Yesterday I did no. Today I will do no. I have no impediments. That's my dancing and chanting of Agile, which has no meaning at all, because it's not into what's really hindering people from being happy at their place and doing their best and growing. And what I think Agile is about, it's about the people and the values, and not about how to word your work. So, but I see that it's I still pop my head out of the mud and will say, okay, I have an idea, we could try it so like this, please let's at least try it, and if it's okay, it's okay. If not, if it's getting worse, then just skip it.
Yeah, I would suggest in the retro that you stop the dancing and chatting. Just say, we're going to not do the dance. Nowadays, from now on, for the next sprint, we're going to try just talking about blockers. So we'll look at the cards and say, are there any blockers? Are there any blockers? And make it fast. But use the retro. The retro is the greatest invention.
Yeah,
Even
thank
better
you so
than
much.
open space, apparently.
Okay, I'm going to ask, I think we've probably got time for one more question. Chris asked that somebody asked this question because he's on a bus and can't come on video. But his question was, what if you're somewhere and you have a embedded, very expensive consulting agency, like working with everyone, and management thinks they're just doing a great job and providing lots of value. And I think his question's implying that maybe they're not. What are some strategies for dealing with that?
Barksdale said, if we're going to look at the data, let's look at the data. If we're going to go with opinions, let's use mine. So he was the CEO of Netscape. I think it comes to the bit I was saying earlier. You've got to understand why you're doing it, and you've got to measure that, and you've got to be able to show that they're not doing a good job. But executives are experts share their opinion with executives day in, day out. And generally they make their own, they listen to their own opinion. But if you show them data, then they will act. I think I killed the internet and the vibe with that one.
No, I was thinking, but I don't have better answer to that, Chris. So I really couldn't add anything more than that. And I'm
Okay.
surprised that it's not visible in front of their face. They're probably not delivering stuff. Yeah, so I will ask, who is hiding? Who is spreading the fog that doesn't let them see what is obvious to everyone else, where the fog is? I would be curious also about that.
Okay, well, we got 2 minutes left, so I will take my prerogative and ask a question that I've been thinking here. On the idea of inviting, how do you see that if you have the ability to form a team? What do you see as a balance of inviting a team to try things versus saying, hey, we're going to form a team and here's kind of what we're going to start with trying or something? Is there more latitude for kind of saying, here's what we're going to start with when you're actually forming a team, letting people choose? I guess you're inviting them to choose it or not choose that team, but actually having a little more structure around that.
Yeah, so there's a definite tension here, right? We want people to work in iterations. We want them to engage in retrospectives so they can get feedback and study the numbers and see how they can improve. We want them to use a good, done definition already, other things like this. Okay. At the other extreme, there's telling them how to do absolutely everything. So what you've got to do is limit the amount of time. You ask them to try something like, say, iterations, retrospectives, daily meeting, definition of done, definition of ready, and then for 3 months. And if it's the more messed up than last USA Thanksgiving's turkey, let's drop it like a bad habit and try something that might work. But let's give it a chance to work and suspend disbelief and pretend and act as if, with the idea that we're going to have a referendum in a couple of months or 3 months on all of this. And if it's bad, we're going to drop it. Okay. And this is a way to get people in. So the first thing is to time box the ask and say, not for the rest of your career, just for the rest of the next 3 months, right? Or 2 months or whatever. And then the second thing is if they initially say no, in general, when you're inviting people, give it a little time, do a little bit more study, and then ask for less. This is the reason why I'm married to the same girl for decades. When I first met her, she wanted nothing to do with me whatsoever, but I kept asking for less and less and less and less. And then she said yes to a very small ask. And the rest is history. So there you go. Time box your ask and keep asking for less.
Okay. I like that about being a two-way street. It sounds like, you're not going to impose stuff, but you're wanting people to have the willingness to try things. And that sounds like
it's also tremendous fun to invite people and see what they do. It's fun to ask them to do things and see what they do. You don't know what people are going to do. It's fun to see what they do.
Cool. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you all so much, Chris, Luca, and Daniel. If there's any links you think of that would be great to get in people's hands because the chat goes away, please just email them to me. I'll send an email out to everybody with them. Put your own stuff on there. Anything that you think might be useful would be great. Thank you so much for coming. And Luca, thank you so much for reaching out and helping us set this up. We really, really appreciate it. Everybody have a great day.
Thanks, Luca. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks for having
Thanks,
us,
Chris.
Mark.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you all.
Nice to see you
Thanks.
all. Bye.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Luca.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.